this body? What is it?
Fleming of St Mary's Hospital, London, who discovered that it produces the drug known as penicillin.
The question was, which drug would go with which cell?
It's a collaboration that's unexpected because it's between humans and the tiniest organisms.
The howl of a dire wolf.
Dorset lamb may represent a major landmark.
I did not start off planning to design proteins.
Scientific breakthrough will probably be something that we hard to imagine.
Test at birth could map out an individual's entire future risk of disease.
I think a great place to start with both of you would be just like, how did you meet, right? You started a company together, but where did this relationship start?
Yeah, I can probably start. I had gotten out of my last startup, which was in industrial data analytics, so kind of machine learning, AI applied to industry, and was looking to get into aging research through a whole company and effort that my mother had started. In brief, although certainly can go into more detail, she teamed up with a professor at UC Irvine, Michael Rose, back in the 2000s, and worked to produce long-lived fruit flies through artificial selection of those flies. So I thought, she was essentially retiring, trying to figuring out like, what do we want to do with those flies? I was like, well, maybe we can start a biotech and really kind of take that research effort into a company. But I knew that I needed a biotech co-founder. I didn't have a background in biology, but both my parents are doctors, so kind of I have some background in it, but I was not a biologist by any means. So I looked into my network, asked people kind of who would make sense to meet. A bunch of people, in particular Laura Deming, thought that it would be a good idea to meet Martin. He was studying fruit flies at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. So I thought, well, that's perfect. If somebody's going to tell me whether this is a good idea or not, then that could be him. So yeah, I just emailed him or we had an introduction. I forget exactly what it was, but we ended up
Maria also introduced us.
Yeah, there were like 3 or 4 people all at the same time. Yeah. But yeah, then we ended up having breakfast at a cafe in San Francisco and talking about the fruit fly research and startups in general. And yeah, just kind of like, what did we want to do to change the way that people were pursuing age-related diseases?
Absolutely. And you've been in the aging space, Martin, for a very long time. I think I've seen your name on pretty much every aging-related website that there is, and have been wanting to meet you for a long time. So how did you get into this space of aging, and like what motivated you to devote your life to this?
Yeah, I guess originally I was going to be a lawyer because I liked arguing. This is when I was like 13. Yep. And then at some point I maybe thought a little bit deeper, but like, okay, well, what's the point other than, doing something like that? And, honestly, I just couldn't figure it out. What's the meaning of life? I feel like maybe it's clearer now, but I don't know what the point is, but like we have to be alive. Whatever it is that we're supposed to do, whether it's like write poetry or, like play in the NFL or be a family or something, you have to be alive to do it. And so that was just kind of the conclusion early on of like, we have to have that optionality, and then that gives us freedom to choose to do whatever we want. And so default, we're all dead, right, painfully. And so let's change that. That's the first thing to do. And then there might be lots of other things in life as well. And then, that turned out to be non-trivial. And so here I am 20 years later, still trying.
As all good Jenny start. I'm curious, how would you respond to the general argument that what really matters is that our species survives, right? That like an individual human living forever doesn't actually matter. Like this is kind of like the Elon Musk argument that if we all lived for a very long time, there'd be sort of social stagnation, there'd be reduced social mobility. What's the argument in favor of extending lifespan and sort of immortality if society kind of weakens as a result, potentially?
Yeah, I think it's, definitely an assumption that society would weaken as a result, right? I mean, for one thing, you have some people who are very competent, creative, whatever, right? Like Bob Dylan, still doing stuff, right? And so what happens if this person actually gets to be alive for longer? So how many areas are there where some really rewarding knowledge that humanity could unlock is not happening because you only have time to like specialize once and like have one career, right? Like some people are excited about quantum biology. I'm not sure yet, like very early, right? But like, what if you could actually understand quantum phenomena and biology really well in 2 different careers and then go there? So I think we're just like not even exploring the like combinatorial intellectual realm of humanity if we only have like so many years to do it. But ultimately, I think it depends on, like you get to choose what matters. Why does it matter whether humanity lives? Right? Like all humans could die. There'd be a bunch of fungus or whatever. Like, why does humanity matter to Elon Musk? Because he's a human and he decides that like this matters to me. So if you choose to decide that your life doesn't matter or the people around you, their lives don't matter, I don't think there's like a proof that you're wrong about that. I feel differently, right? Like I feel that the people around me are valuable and that life would be better for me and for them if they were healthy.
And I mean, I just want to stress the assumption part of that. Like, I think it depends on your worldview, but in my opinion, I think we've demonstrated that assumption is wrong. I mean, we've doubled the lifespan or tripled or, whatever, depending on the metric over the last 100, 150 years, being on the planet. So in a sense, there's been a ton of longevity research and we've fixed a ton of the things that caused people to die young, infant mortality, like all of these pieces. And I would say the world is much better off. Certainly those people are much better off. And we've seen this experiment happen, right? I mean, there are people that do incredible things in their 50s and 60s and 70s that, in large part, they would not have had that opportunity to do. So, yeah, I mean, to me, I feel like it's 2 different questions, right? It's like, I don't think anybody here is talking about achieving immortality, I think that I think we can and should attempt to cure the diseases that ail us or that eventually cause us to die inevitably. But, in the end, people are still going to die. I mean, things are still going to happen. And so I think there are kind of 2 separate questions in my mind of do we ourselves want to live longer kind of as a personal mission? And then, of course, advancing the human race.
Of course. And I'm making the devil's advocate argument there, but
for sure.
I think that the core concept that you guys have both arrived at is that most diseases are age-related, and that if we can address them at the root cause, then we can address most diseases and improve human prosperity. But you also have very different backgrounds, right? You used to work at Tesla. You had a very academic upbringing. Obviously, you also did academic before that, and you were in AI research and whatnot. But how did you both arrive at this conclusion together? Like, can you walk me through the core philosophy around, what is aging? What do we have to do to prevent it? Why is it important to think about diseases through this lens of age-related diseases?
Yeah. Well, I can start. I mean, as I said before, right, I was not a biologist. I'm not a biologist by any formal training. And I think there'd be a lot of complementarity here, but I really approached this from a very naive standpoint, which was we don't really know what aging is. I mean, in the kind of like popular culture, like we know what the number is, we know what people who look older or seem older or kind of what happens when you get older. But from a biological standpoint, I don't think there really is a very good definition of that. And I think that's the core question, and I think that's the real basis for Gordian. I mean, even why we called the company Gordian, right? Like, I think biology is this very complex, as of right now, kind of unsolvable knot, and we don't even know where to begin, really, And I think that really formed the underpinning for the company was, well, given that we don't really know where to begin, given that, we have some ideas or maybe some thoughts, what can we really do to approach discovery in that context in a totally new way?
Got it. Anything to add, or?
Yeah, I think it's, that basically describes it. But also think about, like, you don't need any background to see aging or to, like, realize that you care about that, right? Like, anyone who has grandparents or parents or whatever, you see it, right? So you're just like, do I like this? No. Right? And then you can't even describe what this is, right? You can be a 4-year-old child and just, like, see the situation and just be like, this makes me unhappy. She's walking slowly. She fell over and she didn't immediately get back up, whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there's something very, quintessentially human there, where you just realize that, like, this decline and this disappearance gradually of people that you care about matters, right? But then, yeah, how do you get started on some biology that's tremendously complex? And that I agree with Francisco, like no one alive today has like a mechanistic definition of like, here's how aging happens that we know to be true. So then what do you do?
Yeah, and so you started Gordian, and the core concept was that your training data should look like your test data. Tell me a little bit about what does that mean? What's the point?
I would say there's kind of a concept before that, which was kind of the importance of the in vivo environment. I'll leave that to Martin to kind of get into the details. I think the implication there is that when people go to discover drugs, kind of the way the industry looks at drug discovery, obviously we can't ethically go test whatever we want in humans. We have a framework for that, which are clinical trials, but that's quite very rigorous and limited in terms of what we can test. The step before that is testing in animals, is in vivo testing. That is kind of the next best thing that we can do. And given that that is generally a gating factor for going into clinical trials, particularly for efficacy, right? There are some efforts on changing that for safety and things like that. But in terms of figuring out like what actually works, what has a hope of working, animals are really the best that we can do. This kind of leads into the whole kind of animal avatar concept and what are the best animal models that we can get into. But the concept behind what we wanted to do was identify drugs in a system that looks like the system you're going to test it in. So if you're going to go do your tests in an in vivo environment, if you're going to go test in these rodent models or these large animal models or whatever they happen to be, why are we doing discovery in a system that is not that? And there were a whole variety of reasons for that. And it kind of boils down to it's very expensive to do animal testing and very expensive to do discovery in animals. And that really kind of gave rise to or gave birth to why we created Gordian. Right? We wanted to make that process much, much more efficient and actually just make it practically possible to do discovery directly in the animals that we are going to test in. I think after that, the kind of benefit is obvious, right? Like if you're going to go discover in that system that you're going to go test in, your discoveries are going to be much more relevant to that system that you're going to test in. You're going to be able to execute on those tests in a much more efficient, much more confident manner, and then move into clinical trials much more confidently because of that.
And that brings it back to the, as you said, train where you want to test, right? So if you want a drug that goes into a heart that's beating and failing and metabolizing, glucose or fatty acids or, like this whole situation going on and there's fibrosis starting. So that's the situation you want to treat. If you want to know whether your drug treats that in a human being, you could test the drug in just some system that you've engineered and said, well, if we assume that the fibrosis matters this much and we can replicate it with a plastic plate that's this hard, and then we put the cardiomyocytes, and then you make all these assumptions. And hopefully you're right, but these are complicated biological systems we don't understand. And so you could also just not make a lot of assumptions and just find a way to get into that system where you want things to work and test there.
Got it. So then you kind of settled on this concept of in vivo pooled perturb-seq, basically introducing a bunch of genetic perturbations in live animals and then doing sequencing to see what the effect of these perturbations were. Ideally within the actual diseased model, you sort of talked about how, for example, heart disease, you'd want that to develop naturally in the organism rather than trying to sort of force simulate it in some model that doesn't quite recapitulate the human clinical endpoints that matter, right? But how do you actually do that? Like this is like a pretty interesting and difficult concept to pull off. What was special about the science that you guys brought to the table that allowed you to do this in a scalable way?
Yeah, I think there's the big unlock is just how many animals do you need? Because it's not that Gordian has like invented some new model system that is dramatically better necessarily. Rather, it's that if there is a system that's better, that everyone would agree is better, we can go in and do stuff there at scale. And so, for example, in our osteoarthritis program, the standard model would be a mouse, often even a young mouse, even though it doesn't really happen in young people, and then you injure the knee, and then you cause sort of like degradation of the cartilage in the joint, and that's symptomatically and similar to osteoarthritis. But of course, in people, it develops over decades with various different triggers and so forth, right? Okay, what we use is a horse. Why a horse? Well, it has actual cartilage thickness, similar to a human. It has sort of like a vertical load bearing. And there are a bunch of horses that have developed arthritis by running around or like being farm horses or race horses or something like that, right? So they've developed the disease in a way that's much more similar to humans. Now, if you go out and you ask whatever, the most conservative biotech veteran, right? Like, would you rather have data from these mice where we cut their tendons? Or would you rather have data from horses that developed arthritis naturally? Which one gives you higher confidence in the clinical trial? I'm pretty sure everyone would say the horses. But you're not going to go do your early stage discovery in that system if you need whatever tens of thousands of horses, right? Mm-hmm. So the fact that we can just look at what is the best option and then go there, I think is the differentiator.
And also the fact that you can do this in a single animal, right? So usually you introduce gene perturbations at like an individual organism level. Each mouse has its own perturbation. You're doing this like in a pooled manner. Talk to us a little bit about that, like to try and explain that to like a layman audience or someone that's unfamiliar with in vivo perturb-seq. How does that work?
Yeah, so basically in standard like high throughput screening in pharma, let's say, you have millions of plastic wells that are full of some cells. So you see different cells in different wells, and then you have a robot that puts one drug on this one and one drug on this one and one drug. So why do you do that? Because you want, in order to determine causal relationships, you want isolated experiments, right? You want to change one parameter in each case. So that's the basic of, like testing, right? Mm-hmm. Now, imagine if we just say, we test 100 drugs in one animal. The first thing people assume is like, okay, you give one animal 100 drugs, and then like everything happens, and basically it's Brian Johnson. And then you don't know who did what, right? Like, even if something good happens, you're like, okay, which one of the things did the thing, right? Mm. So that's what we have to avoid. So what we do instead is we use these gene therapies to put the perturbations into the animal, because each viral particle will go into exactly one cell, and then it will change that cell. And so if you put a low enough number of virus particles in, then you get sort of a mosaic of different cells throughout an organ that have received one different perturbation each. And then if you're able to look at those cells one by one, which is where the single cell transcriptomic comes in, now you have, again, these independent experiments. But instead of being like sort of separated by walls of plastic, they're separated by the disease tissue that you are trying to study, right? And the whole disease environment. And so, yeah, that's basically it. You create this sort of patchwork organ, right? With all the different treatments.
And I think your first use case of this was in celiac hepatitis. Walk us through, like, what was the organism that you used? How did you get this experiment sort of set up?
Yeah. I mean, we wanted to set up a kind of a positive control experiment as best we could. We picked the liver for a variety of reasons, and I had done tests in different organs and things prior to that. But really, what we wanted to do was set up a system where we had disease that people were interested in. So this was MASH at the time. There were clinical trials that had been run with targets that we could replicate in gene therapy form that had either failed or succeeded to some extent. The unfortunate reality is for most of the diseases that we're going after at Gordian, there aren't approved drugs. So there's no, true positive control. Otherwise, obviously, we wouldn't be looking. So that's kind of the way that we set the experiment up. So we set up a MASH model mouse. We introduced 25 different gene targets into that animal. 6 of those were targets of clinical trials that had been run in the prior, 3-4 years. And our goal was to recapitulate the results of those trials. And the idea is that, had we run this experiment prior to those trials, would we have been able to predict the outcome of those trials? and then, so 6 out of the 25 were those, and then we had another 17, 18, 19 in there that were other, targets that we were interested in pursuing or kind of investigating, kind of novel targets. We ran that experiment, and lo and behold, we were able to recapitulate the results of those clinical trials with a pretty high degree of accuracy. In particular, we had FGF19 and FGF21 in there that did show some positive therapeutic effect in humans, not enough to make it all the way to approval, but we were able to see the results of those pieces. And then we were able to predict the negative effects of many of the targets that we had also included that had just failed trials, either phase 2 or phase 3 entirely.
So just walk the future with me here. Are you suggesting that sort of in vitro testing will be a thing of the past in the future? That sort of anytime you want to bring a drug to market, that the first thing that you do is you do sort of this in vivo perturb-seq testing with your targets. You do basically all your preclinical work in this sort of model, or is there still going to be a place for in vitro testing?
I think the idea would be, you can add to this, but I think the idea would be we want to flip the order, where most people start with in vitro testing because it's cheap and easy and quick, and there are robots and all that kind of stuff. What we do is we start with in vivo testing, oftentimes in vivo testing in kind of complex or large animal model systems, which usually is reserved for the end of that kind of preclinical development pipeline. In vitro testing still has its place. The advantage to in vitro testing is you can do it in a system that is human. It's got limitations, obviously, as Martin described, right? Like, it doesn't recapitulate the entire in vivo environment, but animals are still animals and they're not human. And so the way that our typical pipeline looks is we start with in vivo testing. We identify a set of drugs that we know is going to work in that in vivo environment, right? Again, coming back to the look where you're going to test. Right, we know we're going to pass that test later on, right? We like to think about it as cheating on the test, in a sense. But then we go put through things through a whole panel of in vitro tests that confirm that not only is that going to work in the animal, which we know, but it's also going to work in a human system. And there we look to go into as advanced an in vitro system as we can. And so typically there we'll look at tissue slices or some kind of complex co-culture or something like that. And again, we can bear the cost of those experiments or the infrequency of getting those specialized tissues or anything like that, because we have relatively high confidence that things are going to work. And so that initial in vivo test really kind of elevates the rest of all of the tests that come after that step.
Anything to add on that front?
No, I think that's right. Basically, you want to merge a couple of things, right? You want evidence that this will work in humans, evidence that it will work in the environment of the disease, right? And then, of course, that it's safe and non-toxic and so forth, right? And I think there's a lot of focus on this, like, will it work in humans? And that's all, like, I don't know, I say obvious, it's probably underappreciated, even though it's obvious. But like, there's a lot of focus there, and there's like, okay, let's make iPS stem cells and then, do an experiment to see whether this person, this drug will cure Alzheimer's in these, stem cell derived neurons, which is, you get the human part, but you don't have microglia, you'd have like these embryonic cells, like you've sort of sacrificed this part, right? Like the disease relevant environment of testing for the other part. And so I think the union of those two is, a more ideal future for drug discovery.
I see. Okay. I think another part of your strategy is building your own models as well. So you're collecting a large amount of in vivo data. What do you hope to do with this?
Ultimately, we hope to make drugs that cure a lot of diseases, right? And so you are on that path, and we have targets that we've discovered that, have as good data as anything for curing, let's say, osteoarthritis, right? But at the same time, people talk about virtual cells right now, and some people are angry at virtual, whatever. Like, there's current controversy of virtual cells, right? But like, the concept there is just like, if we measure a lot of stuff, including some perturbations, then perhaps we could create a causal diagram of like a cell, and that would be cool because cells are like the basic entity of biology according to some, other people would say it's different layer of abstraction, right? So now think of the virtual organism, right? Where the more data you collect with this approach, where you perturb different things in different tissues, and there's overlap here. So now you know what, if we did this, if we gave this drug as a small molecule, here's what would happen in the heart, here's what would happen in the liver, and so forth. Now you can start to make predictions around. Like, you need a lot of data there. And, I think that's where us generating more and more data has a compounding value.
Understood.
And I think part of the goal for us is, coming back to the maybe one of the original questions, right? Is like kind of what is aging? The more that we probe the biology and perturbations of the biology of particular diseases, and the more diseases that we do that across, the more we can relate what are changes in biology doing to the heart, to the lung, to the liver, and what are kind of fundamental drivers of multi-cause comorbidities or pieces like that, right? Like, can we really derive the drivers of these diseases in a more fundamental way? And I think the ultimate goal would be kind of get at what is aging, kind of what is fundamentally going on, or the set of things that are fundamentally going on that are really driving the whole panoply of chronic diseases, that together kind of comprise aging itself. I would say the more specific piece here is we do want to produce drugs. I think we want to go after drugs that are multimorbidity, that can really go after multiple diseases at a time. And I think we're starting to see some of that with the GLP-1s and the incretins and the Ozempics. And I think that's really that's the future that we want, right? Is we can make modifications to our bodies as they age to prevent them from aging. And that's got to necessarily be across multiple organ systems and multiple indications.
Got it. I think this kind of comes back to something that you've been vocal about, Martin, which is that traditional drug discovery ignores aging, right? Or aging biology generally. What do you sort of mean by this? And how can drug discovery in the future better recapitulate aging biology?
Yeah, I mean, the simple model is just like, okay, go, make outbred mice and like age them to the relevant age. Like, if you're going to use mice for your studies, which most people use for most things, there are other model organisms, same thing applies there, right? Just like, if this disease doesn't happen before 65, why are we using, 10-week-old mice to study it? Right. So, and I think, it's not like people are stupid and they're like totally unaware of this thing, right? It's just like, okay, logistically, that's really annoying because now I have to like either plan 2 years in advance or I have to pay somebody else to take care of these mice for 2 years and then like make sure that there's a supply. And so you just get like, there's a limited number of model organisms that are like available for those experiments. But the call to action is kind of like, okay, we know that this disease only happens in old people. So something is changing with age that causes this disease to manifest, right? There may be triggers that are not age-related, but the body in its age stage is unable to cope with this, influenza or whatever it is, right? And so if we know that those things exist, and then we just go and study young animals, then we know that we are finding drugs that would cure Alzheimer's if 25-year-olds got Alzheimer's, just to use one example, right? Like, we know that there's a missing piece. And then the best we can do is like, okay, well, understand it mechanistically, and then again, go look for human genetic evidence and do different things that allow us to sort of like have a better view of this, and then hope that it works, hope that the missing pieces are not critical. And it's not like I could prove, oh yeah, they are critical here, all these things, right? Like, we do have a tendency to have drugs fail in diseases of aging, right? Like, obviously neurodegeneration has been very hard, but also, what we've been able to do in cardiovascular disease, for example, is very much related to lifestyle and obesity. And there are other changes in diseases like HFpEF where, there's some sort of residual risk that we haven't been able to cure. But, I'm not, I can understand why Roche don't go out and say, okay, only old mice from now on, right? Like, we need to budget an additional $7 billion to like buy these mice of Jacks or whatever it is. And we will get like an unknown amount of benefit in our predictability. I mean, this is frankly, to tangent a little bit, this is a huge issue for drug discovery and for aging drug discovery specifically, which is it is extremely difficult to measure early on how good is your predictability of this model, right? And so that means that you just kind of have to like go with your gut on whether a given approach is going to be better or not, right? Organ on a chip. We're going to go build all these things. And you can make arguments for why it's better. You can also easily make arguments for why it's worse. But nobody can tell, right? Because the only way you really tell is like you run trials. And so like a decade later, assuming that collectively everyone sort of did this in roughly the same way, now you can see like, did our success rates change? And there are some experiments you can do where it's like, oh, this actually changed a lot. You know, like surrogate endpoints getting validated by the FDA gives a sharp uptake in like approvals. But a lot of the time you can't tell. And so like, what do? This is an issue, right? So I think, yeah, that's the exhortation is like, if you know there's something missing, you know, we should at least be, if we've had repeated failures and we know we're using a system where something is missing, maybe we should try putting in some of those missing pieces like aging, right? So that would be an exhortation for like neuro research, for example, and a lot of other places.
And I think that gets back to the core premise for Gordian is that the practicality or impracticality of doing that, right? Like you said, like Roche should devote $7 billion or whatever. I mean, the goal for us was really to create a system by which the quality of the animal, how advanced that animal model was, how aged it was, how large it was, whatever, had much smaller impact relative to the resources that are going into the experiment and the results that we get out of that experiment. And so, we can run the equivalent of, horse in vivo studies in osteoarthritis that would require tens of thousands of horses. And even if you had the money that you wanted to put into that and could ignore the ethical considerations of slaying that, there's no stable in the world. It's just like, that's a completely impractical experiment to run. Yep. And we can really enable something like that.
Got it. So there's kind of like two approaches to making aged animals more common in like preclinical testing. Like one is the Michael Floria model of let's build smart cages and make it actually cheaper to produce these aged mice, and hope that sort of this encourages researchers to implement them in their trials. And then your approach is like, let's turn one animal into like a billion animals through in vivo pooled screening, and just collect more data. And this is the sort of the other approach. Is that like a good, fair summary?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing you could do, depending on what you're what is your goal? If your goal is just like the field is more productive overall, there's a couple of other things to think about. One of them is there are different animal models that we use for research, and you can get old mice already, and we can make it cheaper to get old mice. And also sometimes you don't want to use mice. And so like, where is the aging colony of like an animal with a lifespan of 30 years? Should we start that now? So this is like for the person who got incredibly rich doing like a unsexy thing really well. Like they made cement and now they have like $200 million from making cement, and they're like, you think you're cool because you're doing like some tech, whatever. Like I made a lot of money because you were like too whatever, like you didn't think this was cool enough. So like that person would have a solid understand, and then like this person magically like wants to support aging research. That person would have a solid understanding of like, look, just the availability of these animals is like unsexy, but like you can't hurry it up, right? Like what are you gonna do if you need old horses, right? I mean, probably what you'd end up doing is you go for some kind of species of animal that we've domesticated, and therefore there's old ones, right? And there's people going into pets with aging drugs and so forth. So anyway, that's one side of it. But also think about like, Olden Labs is doing in some sense, like supply subsidization, right? Like supply side push, right? You could also try to create more demand side by demonstrating the importance, right? And so I think sort of the first people to go and show like this effect only works like this if you have aging present. That could motivate more from, because like, we have old mice already, right? And so if like Roche really wanted to use old mice, they could use old mice. And they do probably occasionally, but for the most part, they are not motivated enough to do it. They don't have a reason to do it. So go demonstrate that there is a reason to do it. And now people can do it. And then once you get there, now there's like more demand for our approach to doing it, Michael's approach to doing it, et cetera.
Got it. Yeah. I think this is just an interesting point that you brought up a bit earlier around some of the most ambitious bio people generally tend not to start in bread and butter industries, such as like what Michael has done. They don't care about like resource limitations and trying to address them. They want to sound sexy, like I've got an AI startup or I've got a pharma company and I'm doing deals with these pharma companies. What do you think, what sort of advice would you have for a founder that is like willing to do anything and like just wants to accelerate aging, just wants to accelerate biotech research generally? What's missing? Like what needs to be changed about the existing system to accelerate everyone's efforts and yeah, make the world a better place?
Something.
Is it a company or is it anything? Because you said at the end, everyone's efforts are better and so forth, right? And like there is a problem there of like there are some things you could do in that direction, like develop biomarkers that may be hard to capture value from in the current system.
Okay.
And then there are maybe other things that like if you're doing a company. So which ones?
Give me one of each, right? So one of something that you can do in academia that is very high yield, but maybe you don't get rewarded for it. And two, a company idea that you think would generate a lot of like money and capital, but just generally is not sexy and enough people aren't addressing the problem.
Yeah, the academic one I think is kind of easy. I mean, this is on my nonprofit's website as well. Like, get a bunch of mice. You can write a grant. This would be like, I don't know, in academia, maybe a couple $100,000. Get a bunch of mice, get some blood samples, measure proteomics and DNA methylation, give them a bunch of drugs, like do this in association with the intervention testing program or something, or just in the same way, right? Like do a lifespan study and see whether you can predict the effect of drugs on lifespan using epigenetic clocks or proteomic clocks or whatever aging clock. Like, I don't know how many aging clocks we have, probably 100, right? Like, which of these are actually responsive with specificity to lifespan extension treatments, right? That experiment, to my knowledge, has not been done, or at least not published, right? So if you had that, now you have a benchmark of like, hey, should we use any of these clocks to just like not do lifespan studies? Right? Like, can we actually predict that? And if not, then how could we develop clocks that like actually do that, right? So now you have the data. So I think that's the like, I don't know how you capture value in doing it, but like there should be a public leaderboard of like, how good are these clocks at predicting changes in lifespan? Not just like correlations with lifespan, but like they respond. There's a few things that have happened, but they're like retrospective, right? So it's like, oh, these animals, or these people had HIV or different things, right? So they should have accelerated aging. Look, they do have that. But the specificity is unknown. So that's the academic side.
I mean, on the company side, again, I don't know how you build this company. But I think that one thing that I wish we had as an industry, and certainly as Gordian, is the industry does run tests on people all the time. They run clinical trials, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people that are getting these drugs, one kind or another, with whatever indication. I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of data that's out there, and there's no access to either any of the data that's collected or certainly any of the data that could be collected during those trials. I imagine that there's probably a relatively small set of tests that could be done on any human that's getting any given drug that could relate to aging, could relate to biomarkers, could relate to various other indications. Like, there's just a huge opportunity there that I think is being wasted or not seized upon, and then somehow making that data accessible, right? I mean, there are all kinds of other issues there, HIPAA requirements, or who knows what proprietary trials. And all these pieces. But I think that as an industry, we are really missing out on what we could be taking from those trials, because I think, especially considered failed trials, right? Like, for the most part, failed trials, you get one, whatever Yahoo News report that says like trial X failed, maybe the company fails, and then that's it, But that was tens or hundreds of millions of dollars that went into that experiment that is now just completely blown up and and turns into nothing. All we know is that like the target didn't hit that biology well enough, maybe, or maybe the trial was just poorly designed. It's hard to tell. So I think there should be a tremendous amount of value that can be unlocked by capturing that data somehow. And I think that's a very complex problem, but I think that would be extremely valuable.
Yeah, hard to turn into a company.
Right.
Yeah.
It might be more a policy entrepreneurship thing, right?
I think it would have to be both. Yeah, for sure.
Because the pharma company is disincentivized to like, oh, let's put out a lot more data. If anything looks good, then it's like mildly useful and like almost as useful to other people as to us. If anything looks bad, now our drug that's now close to approval might get pulled. So like, it's really not incentivized at all to like share data in this way, right? But okay, what if it's mandatory, right? What if you can't get approval without sharing like X blood samples for like general proteomics from like your trial or something like that? I mean, obviously I'm still being like idealistic and like, sounds simple. It's not going to be as simple. But yeah, you could imagine incentives, like changing the incentives. You could also imagine some version of like, you're getting priority review or whatever. Like if you participate in this like broader data sharing thing, you could imagine that like you get the data sooner than other people get access to the data, right? Like, so it becomes public knowledge in 5 years, but you can act on it sooner to see if you want to do like a label expansion trial for your thing, if there's an upside, stuff like that.
Got it. Okay, cool. So there's an article that Lada wrote recently around sort of being too ambitious is an intelligent way of self-sabotaging yourself if you're trying to be a biotech founder. Both of you obviously have started a company. In what way did you kill your ambition to pick an idea or an MVP that is actually achievable?
We're not going after aging. Right? Like the readout, we're not screening for like this thing makes your cell younger. We're screening for a specific, like, does this thing cure arthritis? Does this thing cure heart failure and so forth? I think that's a clear one, for me at least.
Yeah, and I think it's, I mean, for me, I feel like it cuts both ways. Like, I think that there is, I mean, especially right now, like we're in a pretty serious biotech investing slump. Or biotech slump in general for a whole variety of reasons, economic policy, global, everything, right? We don't have to get into all of that. But I think that in many ways that does kind of cram ambition, like right now, especially, companies are, I would say, actively penalized for, we want to go after this, moonshot, whatever, right? Like what investors want to see right now is, do you have a drug that you think is going to work? How do you know it's going to work? Basically, like, do you already have some kind of human data for it? Like this is a really risk-off kind of environment. But I think outside of this, kind of low, I think there is actually benefit to whatever you want to call that force that kind of pushes back against kind of unfettered ambition, let's say. I think that it actually makes sense to, like if I look at, kind of where do a lot of biotechs fail? I think, or just tech companies in general fail. I think it really is the business plan that people put together or don't put together. And I think the science is hard. And this is often the advice, people ask, they're like, what advice would you have for, somebody who's just wanting to start a company? Generally, my advice is like, however hard you think your science is, and biotech is really, really hard, getting the business plan right is harder. I think that is very complicated to do and very necessary and critical to do. And I think that being able to, like, I don't think you want it to temper your ambition, but I think you do want it to kind of guide that ambition and what are the steps. So it's like, we're not going after aging as our first thing for a whole variety of reasons. But that doesn't mean that we don't ultimately want to do that, and we don't ultimately want to get there, and that we don't have a playbook for how we get there. And I think that really is the right way to do it. If you look at really successful company, I mean, look at SpaceX, right? It's like Elon didn't start in 2001 or whenever and say like, I'm going to build a rocket to go to Mars. He was like, I'm just going to build a rocket that does exactly what every other rocket does, and he took the first 8 or 9 years of the company to do that. And then he had a plan that was, and then we're going to, reusability, and then right? Same thing with Tesla, right? I'm going to go build a, super fancy sports car and sell 2,500 of them. That's not going to change the world. That's not going to change, the environment or anything like that. But it does kind of form the basis for a company that can later do that. So I think there is something to the push against ambition that can, if used correctly, really refine a company, right? And allow it to have a playbook that can actually move it into something successful.
I agree. I think there's not enough like SpaceX's for bio projects, right? Like, usually they target some indication and they want to get to market as quickly as possible or get acquired. No one's thinking like, how can I generate cash flow? Apart from like a few people that I know that then finances this longer term, like mission-driven biotech company that I have.
It's hard in bio because almost all the cash flow comes from approved drugs, right? And so for space as an industry, it wasn't an industry, right? Arguably before SpaceX, there are contractors that pay NASA and so forth, right? But like, if you can make the cost of launching stuff to orbit go down, initially, all you get is like giant government contracts to do that because they're the only customer, right? But eventually you bring them further down. Now other people can give you money because they want some stuff in space to like make pharmaceuticals or whatever, right? And then if they're making money, if their business plans are actually good, they get more money, and so like you're bringing the cost down, makes it possible for them to do something. If they have good ideas, if they have bad ideas, they'll fail. If they have good ideas, they'll make money, pour it ultimately from just whatever consumers who want like internet, and then that can go back into this model. In biotech, like just everything comes from the approved drug. Like there's every other like source of revenue or whatever. I mean, some of it comes from government grants, but it's like all flows from approved drugs. And like we talked about earlier, it's very difficult to say whether doing this thing differently is going to increase my chance of getting an approved drug, because there's low N on like your feedback and it's like much delayed, right? So like, did this drug work because I used a heart on a chip or because I used in vivo screening or whatever it is, right? So I think that's part of the reason why it's hard to monetize along the way. I mean, I think the classic model of whatever, Alnylam or Millennium or something, it's like, yeah, you get partnership with pharma companies and you can do those and you can like get non-dilutive funding over a long period of time. And then eventually you can like make your own drug using a platform technology like siRNAs. And then, you can make lots of drugs in that way. And that took whatever, 20 years or something for Alnylam, right? So that's one way to do it, but there's not like that many ways to do it. That I can see.
Yeah. I think like touching on the whole state of biotech funding as well, right? There's obviously grant funding is in the dumps. A lot of labs are closing down. The biotech VC ecosystem is pretty in the dumps as well. And then obviously like Series A, B, C, also terrible. Pharma relationships are difficult to, or like partnerships are also very difficult to get at the moment. And I guess the question there is, what needs to change? Is it just sort of a return to sort of old government funding models? Are we shooting ourselves in the foot in the US? And where can sort of philanthropic grant funding come in to sort of step in and save the day?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much. I mean, I think we are shooting ourselves in the foot, I guess, maybe to
that was the easy part of it.
I think, I think about this often, right? Like the pharma, and if you look at these rankings of like, what are the most hated industries, right? Pharma industry is just like the worst. And in the public's eye, and there are a lot of legitimate reasons, for that. I've had lots of friends that have been very sick, or parents, or whatever, and kind of getting through the system is extremely challenging. And I can see the direct frustration that people have with that. That being said, those same people, when they get treated, suddenly become very grateful for the fact that there are these targeted cancer immunotherapies, or whatever that happens to be going on. So I think there's a real way that we are shooting ourselves in the foot, where we are punishing the pharma industry and and constraining profits and being upset that drugs are expensive and all this other kind of stuff, and yet at the same time demanding better and better treatments for more and more challenging diseases, and then global politics, right, allowing countries outside of the U.S. to go and constrain those prices completely. So then, of course, the United States needs to charge more, right? It's the only place that pharma companies can make money, et cetera, et cetera. So like that whole system, I think, is really heading in a direction of we're not going to have access to these amazing drugs. Companies like ours are never going to get funded, and pharma companies are not going to have the R&D budgets or resources to make things work. And I haven't even mentioned anything on the approval, or kind of regulatory side. I think there is a tremendous amount that really does need to change if we want to continue to see the kind of innovation that we have that really has come out of the U.S. And if we want to continue to have more successes on cancer treatments, or inventing insulin, or any of these kind of incredible successes that we've had over the last several decades. So yeah, I don't know. I think I'm definitely saddened to see that kind of stuff. I have a friend who's going through breast cancer right now, and she has 90% chance of surviving. But if she had breast cancer 50 years ago, one, they probably wouldn't have detected it, and then two, even if they did, she probably would be dead soon. So I just think that there's a real disconnect there,
Yeah, it's weird that we're really pissed at, this is, I think, Peter Kolchinsky or someone keeps saying this, right? But like there's sort of one part of healthcare costs where costs go down over time, and it's medicines. And then there's like the other 92% of the healthcare system where costs are going up over time. And we're really pissed about that 8% part, right? Like that's the part that's keeping everyone sick or whatever it is, which just seems weird because, yeah, the default state of medicine is that you can try to eat some different plants and see if you die or get better, right? Like if no biotech company or no researcher, scientists ever decided to like work for subpar wages for decades in the hopes of making some medicine that actually really works, then that's your option. Go eat random plants and see if you get better, right? So yeah, that's kind of like, I don't think that's what people want, but like we're going in the direction of that. One thing you could do about it, right, is you could say the government should invest money into it sort of comes back to what we were saying earlier, like being more confident about whether people will be healthy or sick in the future, which, people don't want to be sick in the future. And, Medicare doesn't want to pay for sick people in the future. Demographics are aging, like it's not looking good. And it's kind of a common good. So these things like biomarkers and just like making it apparent whether this thing has a good chance of like making you less sick in the future. You can imagine like, well, hey, that's worth, like a moonshot project, right? Because it's going to pay for itself in terms of like societal cost. If people are less sick, you will have lower healthcare costs, right? And that's kind of something for government or philanthropy, like you mentioned, to do because it sort of benefits everyone, right? And it could potentially get biotech drug discovery out of this sort of like, low positive expected value, but like fragile ecosystem.
And we see this directly. I think this is even at our stage, right? I mean, we're a preclinical company or pushing into the clinic, but we've got an osteoarthritis gene therapy that we want to take into clinical trials based on all the screening and everything else that we've done. We have all the preclinical data and the horse data, and it looks beautiful. I mean, I think it has the potential to be a one and done cure for this disease. And the number one question we get from VCs, now mind you, we're like, we're asking for money to run clinical development and then a phase 1 clinical trial. And the top thing on their mind is, how is Medicare going to pay for this? And are you actually going to be able to make money off of this thing in the end? Just assuming that it works, assuming that we have a one and done, a single injection and then osteoarthritis is cured. And that is the question, you know what I mean? Like there's something going on there. Like that's like, if somebody's like, I think I can cure osteoarthritis with a single injection, the question should be like, are you sure that works biologically? Not like, assume it works biologically. Are you sure you can get paid for it? There's something really off about that. And, or Peter Kolchinsky again, writes, they're not investing in small molecule drugs for age-related disorders. Why? Because the IRA says that after 7 years, the government can negotiate, via Medicare or whatever it is, on pricing for that, right, and squeeze those. And so you have 7 years of profits. And I think there's this general push toward, profits in drug making is bad. And I mean, again, like we see this today, in our company firsthand. Like that sentiment, I think, really affects early stage discovery and discovery of potential cures for these diseases.
And I think that sentiment comes fundamentally from the fact that there are these countries external to the US that have successfully suppressed drug prices very effectively to the benefit of their populations. And then they're pointed to as examples of like why socialized medicine works, right? And then the entire population of the US that is inclined in that political direction will say, oh, look at these other countries, they've been able to negotiate drug pricing, not necessarily recognizing that there would be no prices, like no drugs to price had the US not spent so much money through its healthcare system, through its patient population on these drugs in the first place to finance all that R&D. So it does seem to me like there is like this activism question of like who's going to step up to communicate this message to government in the US that like allows it to break through this partisan divide that we have right now of like, oh, like the Republicans like don't really care about suppressing drug pricing, but the populists kind of do, and then the Democrats really care about suppressing drug pricing and sometimes take actions that actually harm the development of drugs in the first place. Any reactions to that firstly before we kind of move on?
I mean, my mom's Italian. She grew up in Italy, so this was the socialized medicine. I guess back around the time when I was born, her parents were dying, and she has all kinds of direct. I guess maybe I'll summarize that story as her parents were in Italy, and she brought them to the United States to get treated because they were not going to get treated properly in Italy. And at a certain point, they didn't want to do that, and then they ended up passing away. And that's for things that I think would have been relatively easy to, easy the wrong word, but were quite treatable, in the U.S. And they were treatable in Italy too. It's just a matter of like where are the resources and the timing, and like how long does it take to get that, get into the hospital system and all that. And I think the question that I see is, if someone wants to buy. If someone's not that sick, they want to buy some simple drug to do a simple thing, then everybody's like, I should go live in Europe. I should just go order it, order it in Canada and get it shipped to me, whatever. But if someone's really sick, I don't see a lot of people being like, man, I wish I was in the European system right now. I think that's where that system starts to fall apart. That being said, I think the U.S. system is steadily moving in that direction, unfortunately, and it's a total tangled mess. I don't pretend to say that the U.S. system is in some pristine, amazing state. So I think it's complex.
Got it. Anything to add on that front?
Yeah, I mean, just fundamentally, it would be good if the focus was on how efficiently can we save a life or add, a year or 10 years to a life, right? Because there's kind of two questions that, of course, everything is rationed everywhere, right? So in the US, it's like price and it comes to insurance, and in Europe, it's just like, no, you can't have this. That's the case for all resources. And so the questions that a society always answer, whether implicitly or explicitly, is like, how much are we willing to pay per year of healthy life? And then the other question is, could we do that more efficiently? Right? And so if you're willing to pay only this much, then you're going to cut off certain treatments if they cost more and so forth, right? But like, how efficient is your curing of lives, right? And is there something you can look at there? And I think clearly in the US, I don't know, like the US is like, I would be surprised if like I could find any sane person in the world who said the US system is like highly efficient, like healthcare costs are like well controlled and there's no bloat anywhere in the system, right? Mm-hmm. That seems like a good non-controversial, like it's not even, I don't even know like who, and there's a little bit, PBMs and stuff going on right now, but not like a huge amount, right? And so you come back to like, well, should we make more drugs that go generic and then can just cure people? Or should we like have more hospitals, Which one is going to pay off more in the long term? That feels like maybe it could be a good bipartisan sort of like, let's focus in here and like, let's do this part better. And, maybe it does mean like rip up the whole thing and like healthcare from scratch. I'm not pretending it's like a easy way of doing it, but like those seem like really constructive questions. Can we find a way to add healthy years at a lower cost, right? And then separate from that, what % of our national budget do we want to spend on that? I mean, right now it's a huge amount, like a dramatic amount that the US is spending. And so I don't think it's feasible to like for that to go up. So the other one's the one you can focus on.
Let's like expand a little bit more on this like public policy perspective. I think the core argument that like drug developers make when they talk about health economics is that if we have more lifespan extending drugs, what's really going to happen is we're going to compress the sort of sick years. We're going to extend the health span, and so we're going to reduce the total healthcare costs like overall, right? But then the kind of like intuitive, I think, general public reaction to that is, yes, you'll extend lifespan, and maybe you'll extend health span, but that you're not actually going to be compressing that period of sick years that the patient has, and so that the healthcare costs per human in the system are not going to actually substantially decrease. Like, do you have like an argument against this, or like a public policy perspective that?
Well, does it show up in the data? I mean, some people argue this. I've seen this phrase often, like lifespans have gone up, but health span has not. That's not true in the data I've seen. Like, it seems like the age until first morbidity is also going up, and it is getting compressed. So I'm not like, this is not my area of focus. I could be wrong on that, but I just don't know if we have data to suggest that it is true. If there are clearly cases where, certain diseases like cancer end up, like potentially costing a lot if you go through a lot of different treatments, or anything that involves surgery, and so forth. But yeah, I just don't know. I don't know if that's true, but if it was, let's say whether or not it's true, if you just pay more for drugs that don't do that, then people will make drugs that don't do that, right? I mean, like, it's sort of in the aging field, it's, like Tithonus, and people are like, oh, you'll just have eternal. And like the Greek myths are really messing with us, right? Like, they're made up, but we assume it's true, right? And so you'll just have longer life without longer health. It's like, well, that's not, and so we should just focus on the quality of years and stuff. That's not what happens in the mice. Like, when we make the mice live longer, they're healthier for longer. Mm-hmm. So I just don't know if it's, and if we said like, like you get paid, like what if you just got paid by disability adjusted life year that your drug added, right? Like, that's what Medicare pays. One quality, $100,000 or whatever, right? And like, that's it. And so if they are sick, then you don't get paid as much. And so then you're disincentivized from making drugs that do that. And then, everyone ends up having more qualities. It seems good.
My initial reaction to that is actually that's a pretty good answer. But let's implement that. Here's another question, which is just around like the pace of progress, right? Obviously, things are slower right now. Startups are having a lot of trouble raising funding. Academia is suffering. And kind of something that we talked about earlier is that you guys killed your ambition to go directly after aging, at least initially.
Small part of it.
Tempered.
Do you ever worry about the pace of progress? Do you think you're going to be immortal? Are we on track to solving aging and lifespan?
I mean, do I worry about the pace of progress? For sure. I think that is, I don't think we know how complicated it's going to be or how hard it's going to be. And I think that a lot of the policy stuff that we were just discussing, that I'm more existentially worried about that than I am like, are we going to get there on the biology or the science side? I think we will eventually. I don't know exactly when, but to answer that question, yeah. I mean, I am. I think we have a real shot at avoiding many of the intense diseases that our parents are getting now, or our grandparents, have or have passed away from, or whatever. but I think that's fragile. Like I don't think that's in any sense guaranteed that we're going to be able to avoid those fates. And I think it really will take, efforts from, people like us, from all of our fellow co-founders and stuff that's pushing, kind of innovation in biotech. I think that's also going to take efforts on the policy side to correct, a lot of the issues that we were just talking about. I think it's going to take efforts on the pharma side to really kind of push those things forward. I think that's going to take, it's a big system that needs to move in that direction in order to really continue to create that potential future.
I think one of the things I'm interested in is who sort of steps up or steps in to keep the wheel of progress spinning, right? Is it going to be China? Is it going to be impetus grants? Is it going to be...
Sadly, we have less money than China. I mean, philanthropy is, unlikely. So you can do damage control, but just like the number of philanthropic dollars towards healthcare and so forth in the US are like dramatically smaller than, I mean, they're like smaller than the proposed cut to the NIH, right? And the NIH, is bigger than like all of Europe and all of China, and like they're both like by 10x or something, right? So there is an issue there potentially, and the US has just been like unmitigated the leader of like biotech and bio research for a long time, like decades, and maybe we'll just decide not to do that. And it is hard to see like, well, what is the solution? I tend to be like, who steps up? China is going in that direction. They're investing. And so like the default path right now, I think, is that, yes, in like 5 years-ish, it sort of flips. And then China is more important for like developing new drugs than the US is. There'll be lag on certain types of things and so forth. But like, yeah. The question is like, what motivates people to go into that? And so you have always idealism and people who just don't want diseases to happen. But can we fix the markets, right? Like, I think there's an opportunity there for the US to say, oh, we don't, like, this thing is kind of borked, but we want to make it, like, we want to commit to like buying qualities at this certain price or something, right? And so can we set up a way where like that is paid for, right? Because then you still, ultimately, to some extent it matters where it's coming from, but like if there are functional markets and internationally ideally, but like where stuff just can get rewarded, then the system will sort it out, right? I mean, you can get into the details and be like, well, okay, how are we going to train people and the universities and all this stuff? And like, all of that is real. And, some people disagree on like, okay, well, how efficient are the universities and so forth. But the system will sort it out. If you ended up with like, there's literally no university in America and everything is just people playing in their like garage with like repurposed like Synthego kits or whatever, and then going to companies and like screwing around and like coming up with stuff, that probably could work to some degree. As long as there's like, you can get rewarded for doing the thing that actually works, then you can get there. So I guess that's maybe one, rather than just like throwing out the whole thing because whatever, like let's find a way to like make life worth investing in, that should be bipartisan.
Anything to add?
I mean, I guess it's just continuing the same train of thought, right? Like, I think the U.S. needs to step up. I think that China is stepping up in a certain way and is really good at plowing enormous resources and dedicated individuals into making new drugs for known targets or, whatever, all the stuff that's happening now. I think my concern on the China side is if the U.S. were to stop innovating, I think China can produce a lot, but is it going to innovate? Like the latest innovations in AI are not coming out of China, even though China then produces DeepSeek that, they can do it a lot cheaper or, whatever. So that would be my concern for, where the directionality there is. I don't think leaving it to them is going to work because I don't think the kind of innovative system that the US has uniquely enabled is going to get recreated over there. So I think the US does have to step up.
The other thing is whether the US wants to, I mean, if relationships between US and China are tense, then do you want to be in a position where you can't? I mean, people are worried about making cars or whatever. Like, can you make medicines? Can you invent things? What if, it flips and like most new medicines come out of China and then they're just like, well, you can't have any. That would suck. So like the US for that reason as well should, step up.
And I guess this brings us back to philanthropic donors, grants, impetus grants. There's plenty of others. What can they do? Like what's the bottleneck there? Is it just like the number of people that are wealthy enough that are willing to back this? Is there approaches that you have tried to activate the billionaire base to get more excited around funding aging or just funding research in general? What's kind of holding us back there?
I think there's a, aside from like, okay, there's some pool of funding, but the pool of funding, potential funding philanthropically is still in the aging field very meaningful because like the real like amount of funding for aging biology is on the order of like $1 billion per year or maybe 2 globally, something like that, right? Like you take the NIA budget for aging biology, 400 million used to be at least, and so forth, and like, Evolution actually deploying this number and so forth. So it's like, it's not that much. And the other thing is, a lot of that is just like, okay, let's do the things that we're doing, right? And so we talked about earlier, like, let's see whether clocks really work and like make a public leaderboard for that to incentivize making clocks that really work for the purpose of like drug discovery in mice even, without even getting into like human applications, right? Like that is very doable. Like you can do the whole thing and for like, I don't know, $2 million or something. Like do all the studies, fund it for multiple years, set up like the website, Kaggle style, et cetera, right? So like this is something that could be done. I think at least what, in Norn we're trying to do is like make legible the opportunities, because in aging space, there are like outsized opportunities, and Impetus was trying to fund research that wouldn't have been done otherwise. And there's a bunch of these, like this small-ish thing should just happen, right? Like we should run a trial version of what Francisco was saying earlier of like running, like doing additional omics on trials, right? So like running additional set of like proteomics on trial samples probably adds 5% to the cost of the trial or something like that, right? So it's like you could potentially, I think that the bigger issue is like the negotiation, setting up the partnership and so forth, right? But like someone could decide to do that. And you have seen that happening, right? There's things like, okay, we're testing rapamycin in dogs, and I forget who the list of funders were. I think Fred Ursum and Peter Attia and some other people, right? So that's just like a thing that is important that is happening. So there's like plenty of relatively low-hanging fruit in the field, but also there's plenty of people in the field who would love to have your money. And so I think there is sort of a diffusion problem of like people finding, okay, is this really thought through? Is this really like broadly beneficial and so forth? And like believing those opportunities, aside from just believing that, there's anything to it, that there's any hope of success, right? So I think there's, like that's kind of one bottleneck that in the Norn context, we try to solve by, put the proposal together, articulate why it is valuable, and even why it's valuable, whether you think, like that our rate of progress will be this much or whatever, but it's just like we will have more health if we do this thing. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Let's go back to your company. Last question on the company side. What is it that you guys currently need from the world? Like, what can our audience potentially help you with? Are you recruiting? Are you raising? Any pharma execs that are listening as well? What do you need?
I think, probably not unique right now. Funding. I think we have a technology that we've demonstrated. Like I said, we have this osteoarthritis drug that we want to push through into clinical trials. It's ready to go into clinical development. We've run screens in obesity, in heart failure, in pulmonary fibrosis, in MASH. We have such an opportunity to capitalize on targets that we're discovering, but that requires cash, that requires funding of one kind or another. We're engaging with the pharma community very heavily, and so we're actively welcome discussing partnership opportunities with pharma partners that can collaborate around these novel targets and work with us to produce drugs and get those into the clinic. And we're looking for VCs that are really willing to see that longer game and that bigger picture, that can really look at kind of what are we uniquely bringing to this discovery effort that is different and therefore kind of deserves kind of breaking the mold of, who cares about your platform? Just show me your lead asset and like I'll invest in that one thing, which is kind of the typical, for good reason, kind of the typical way that VCs go.
Let's switch things up a bit, rapid fire round. So first thing that comes to your mind when I ask you these questions, maybe I'll alternate between you two as well, and you can follow along once the first person shares. So first one, what's your favorite movie that has nothing to do with science?
I can, just because it's on my mind, Back to the Future. I just love that trilogy. I watched it as a kid. I watched it again with my kids, and it's just such a, it's got cool, kind of sci-fi in it. It's just so well done, and kooky and ridiculous. Anyway, I just love that.
Got it.
Love it.
What about you?
Existence, capital X, capital C.
Okay. What's that about?
What is it about? It's about a video, basically a biotech VR game where you go into this world that's perfectly lifelike, and then you experience a world there. And then there's some confusion about which part is the reality and which part is not. And the reason everyone should watch that is because I keep quoting it, because there's like so many very quotable, like specific scenes, but nobody knows about this film, and so nobody ever gets it. So I just sound like a raving lunatic.
Interesting. How do you spell it again?
So like the word existence, except instead of the CE at the end, it's a Z.
Okay.
So exist, ENZ.
Interesting. Okay.
Which is also the name of the game in the thing. That's why it's capital X, capital C. They have to explain.
Got it. Another question that I'm interested in, why SF and not Boston? And like, what would have to change to change your mind?
I think for longevity specifically, it's sort of serendipitous, I think, for both of us that we were there. Right? Like, if you could ask, if we were in Boston, would we then move to SF? Maybe. I think specifically for this kind of company that you're describing, that's like, we actually have, vision now, vision mid, and vision, like future and like big, and within longevity and so forth. I think SF is better for that kind of biotech than Boston in terms of like the overall enthusiasm of the ecosystem and like the support that you have. Overall biotech, just like biotech period, I think Boston's number one. But
okay.
Yeah, I think San Francisco, the SF Bay Area, it's a big experiment that I think is playing out over there. That tech VCs that did so well in software and all those pieces were just like, well, let's go do it in bio, right? Like we, Tech 8 software or whatever it is. So like, let's go replicate that success. I think bio is unique. It is uniquely challenging, and the markets are unique, and the regulatory, like all that kind of stuff is quite unique and different than in software. I think Gordian got started in that kind of an ecosystem of like, let's go do something differently and see how we can attack problems in a different way and in a non-traditional way. And I think right now that system is getting is meeting up with the realities that I think have structurally caused the kind of the East Coast, Boston ecosystem to develop the way that it has over the decades. I'm curious to see how that plays out, but I hope that the San Francisco kind of tech influence can, I hope its ambition doesn't get squashed. Let's to put back there.
I hope so too. I think SF needs Boston, and Boston needs SF to an extent.
For sure.
Last question for both of you. What's a book that you would recommend and why?
I'll go on the obscure side again because that might be might have more alpha for people. There's a book by Bruce Sterling, who's sort of one of the original cyberpunk people with William Gibson and so forth, called Schismatrix. And it's the journey of one particular character through a lot of different situations, including, going to jail, being exiled, a lot of hardships. So I think it's suitable for founders. And it's set in this world where there's sort of a political schism, not left, right, but rather should we biologically enhance humans or should we cybernetically enhance humans? So I'm guessing that maybe some of the audience here might enjoy that one.
I'd love that. Yeah, thank you. What about you?
I'll definitely say something that's more popular and probably controversial, but I think it relates actually to a lot of the discussions that we had around kind of policy and especially the attitude toward profit and the impact that that's going to have on our ability to develop drugs. But Atlas Shrugged, I think people should read that and think critically about what's going on in the world today, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum or any of those pieces. I think there are a lot of the principles that carry forward, and I think it's playing out in biotech. I think it's playing out in real life. I mean, replace planes with trains, right? And we have planes falling out of the sky at least what appears to me at much higher rate in the last 6 to 9 months than I ever remember.
Oh yeah.
It's anyway.
Put the wolf back in the planes.
I find it to be uncanny, and I think worth a reread.
Absolutely. Well, thanks both for coming on. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome.
Awesome.